Hi everybody, I'm Mike Poland, the scientist in charge of the Yellowstone Volcano Observatory, and this is the monthly update for March 1st of 2022. March 1st, it's Yellowstone's birthday. And it's not just any birthday this year, it's actually the 150th birthday of Yellowstone National Park, which was founded all the way back in 1872. Now, of course, there have been some challenges throughout the history of the park. Relationships with indigenous peoples haven't always been very good. And there have been some challenging, odd wildlife practices. Feeding bears, for example, was allowed for a long time. And even with how the natural thermal features were treated. In fact, in the early part of the 20th century, one of the geysers near Old Faithful was diverted to feed a swimming pool. Of course, these are all practices that have long been done away with as we've learned more about how the park works. And I think that's the real legacy of Yellowstone that's preserved there, is one of inspiration and one of learning. It's hard not to be inspired by being in Yellowstone, whether it's your first visit or your 20th. And there is so much to learn from Yellowstone National Park. One of the stories I love best about that learning experience is from Thomas Brock, who was a chemist that looked at Yellowstone's thermal features, especially trying to study the bacteria that lived at temperatures that would give humans a third-degree burn. Now, this is Thomas Brock in front of Mushroom Spring in 1967. The previous year, in 1966, he and his undergraduate student at that time, Hudson Freeze, sampled some microbes from this spring to try to understand more about them. And back in the lab, Hudson Freeze and lab technician Sally Murphy managed to isolate Thermus aquaticus, which was one of these bacteria living in this bacterial mat here in the spring. Now, over the following decades, other researchers looked at that particular bacteria, and it was in the 80s that another chemist named Carey Mullis managed to pull out the enzyme Taq polymerase. This enzyme had the ability to replicate DNA at very high temperatures. Of course, this was a bacteria that was living in these very hot waters in Yellowstone. This ultimately became the basis for the PCR technique, polymerase chain reaction. You've probably heard of this because it's received very widespread use in genetics and medicine, and of course it's the basis for really rigorous testing for the COVID-19 virus. So that all grew out of this particular spring right here in Yellowstone, and I think is a wonderful example of the kinds of things we can learn when we study this environment. So a really wonderful opportunity to be inspired, to learn, all here in Yellowstone National Park. So happy birthday to Yellowstone. I hope everyone has a chance to experience that sense of inspiration and see all there is to learn about Yellowstone. Okay, now let's talk about what happened during the previous month in terms of activity, from earthquakes to geysers.
It's been yet another month of background activity in Yellowstone. During the month of February, the University of Utah seismograph stations, which is responsible for the operation and maintenance of the Yellowstone seismic network, recorded 83 earthquakes in the region. The largest was a magnitude 2.8 event just on the north side of Yellowstone Lake right here, and that occurred on February 8th. There was also one small swarm in the region just to the south of Old Faithful. There were 23 events that occurred in this area during February 11th to the 12th, and the largest was a magnitude 1.9. That's pretty normal. About 50% of all earthquakes in the Yellowstone region occur as part of swarms. Ground deformation has shown a continuation of the trends that have been ongoing for quite some time. This is vertical deformation at the White Lake GPS station. That's on the east side of the caldera and the Sour Creek Resurgent Dome, and it's over the past 2 years. Each one of these blue dots represents 1 day of data. Downward trends indicate subsidence, and upward indicate uplift. And the overall trend during this 2-year time period is of subsidence of about 2 to 3 centimeters, about an inch or so per year. And this has been ongoing since 2015. There are these little periods of either a pause in the subsidence or a slight uplift during the summer months, and that's because groundwater percolates into the ground. It sort of soaks it up like a sponge and pauses that subsidence. So overall subsidence continues of the caldera on the east side. And of course, the same is true on the west side as well. This is from the Old Faithful GPS station. And over the last 2 years, we see the exact same trend, one of gradual subsidence of a couple of centimeters a year, about an inch or so per year. Now, the signal gets much better here in September of 2020 because there were some trees in the area that were cut down due to a fire that was nearby. The park wanted to reduce the fuel load in case the fire approached the area, and that resulted in less signal bounces and so much cleaner signal. We still see that same pause in the subsidence in the summer months and then a resumption of the subsidence once the summer's over. This little deviation right here towards the end of December of 2021 is due to heavy snow that covered the antenna during that time period. And we really don't see any deformation of note in the area of the Norris Geyser Basin. This is the last 2 years vertical deformation at a site that's just off to the east of Norris Geyser Basin. There really hasn't been much in the way of change. A little bit of uplift during that summer, again due to groundwater recharge, and then we have this really dramatic change here, temporary change, in December of 2021 into early January, and this again is due to heavy snow, which covered the antenna area. And then we're back to basically where we were before, not much in the way of change at Norris. And then finally, looking at everyone's favorite geyser, Steamboat Geyser, also in Norris Geyser Basin, it remains active, although not near as active as it has been in previous years. This is the temperature in the outlet channel from Steamboat, and all of these little bounces up and down here in the early part of February represent minor eruptions. They culminate on February 14th with a major eruption, the only major water eruption of the month from Steamboat. So there have been 2 major water eruptions for the year so far. After that, Steamboat went back down to background activity, just see daily temperature changes, not much in the way of minor activity. And now at the end of the month, we're starting to see minor activity begin to pick up once again, so we can probably expect to see another major eruption of Steamboat Geyser at some point in perhaps mid-March.
Well, that does it for the monthly update for March 1st of 2022, Yellowstone's 150th birthday. Now remember, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to email us anytime. YVOWebteam, all one word, at usgs.gov. That's our email address. So until next month, take care, stay safe, stay healthy. See you later. Bye-bye.